Hi everyone. There's quite a lot to go through, so I'll just cover it at a very high level, and I hope to make some time for Q&A later as well. So, a little bit about me. I'm Samuel. I'm a project manager on Skull and Bones. But before I joined Ubisoft, my journey started off working on an indie game called Masquerada, which is a combat pause for tactics isometric game. And then I moved into computer science and game design at DigiPen, and eventually joined as a quest designer and also switching over to project management after. So, as a project manager at Ubisoft, I manage cross-disciplinary teams to develop regular features and content, and also on a successful burn down of bugs and tasks, and eventually getting it to players. So that's the most important part, right? So in other words, I maximize the quantity and, more importantly, quality of updates to the game. You'll hear the word quality a lot more later in the presentation, so let's go into it. So Skull and Bones. Today, I hope to share some pointers for preparing a game pipeline for the live phase by sharing about how we on Skull and Bones anticipated and prepared for challenges, and how we adapted our production processes, pipelines, and workflows to serve our players as a live service game. Developing a game is hard, and on Skull and Bones, on a large-scale project like this, we made it possible on February earlier this year, with the countless number of people at Ubisoft Singapore, as well as some other former members working on Skull and Bones that I see some of you guys in the audience. So thanks for all of the efforts for this game itself. So we released on Ubisoft Connect, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, GeForce Now, Epic Games, Luna, and more recently, in August, we launched on Steam. For Skull and Bones, post-launch for us means developing content in seasonal packages. Every 3 months, we hope to deliver content, features, and improvements to our gamers. And right now, we are working on finalizing the details for Season 4, which will come soon to players. This is a quick snapshot of what we deliver for a typical season. Specifically, this is for Season 3, and we are right about week 9 now. So you can see that we have a few things up for players, such as seasonal bosses, we have some sea monsters, we have new equipment, new items, and a lot of content for players to go through. But, so, like in all of this, this is the only thing that you see here is players' front-facing content that players have. So where does feedback come into all of this? Today, I'll share 3 pointers on reserving resources, preparing processes, and always adapting. These are what work for us as a team, and of course, every team will have different ways of approaching things, but today I'll share a bit more about what we do. So first off, the first thing we did was to set aside time, resources, and expertise to react to unforeseen circumstances and to build long-term dreams. As we've seen earlier, there's a lot of seasonal content that needs to be developed. But how can we address player feedback? How can we make improvements alongside all of these? When we look at Skull and Bones is quite a unique game. It is extremely ambitious, and when we asked ourselves what we wanted to achieve, this was what we came up with. A variety of modes in a living world with unique naval combat and opportunities to customize ships and characters, working with players to deliver a stable and operational game service. That's quite a mouthful, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So if you have not tried the game, it's available with a free trial. Go try it out. So we grouped our objectives into logical categories. New activities to keep things fresh across seasons, drive acquisition, conversion, and retention, content to give a reason for players to keep playing, and of course, we have to deliver a game that is good enough for players to buy, so quality. These are grouped into sub-teams within activities, content, and quality. But the main focus today is to look at this team that I'm a part of, the quality team. Now, quality team isn't the quality assurance team, but rather a unique team that we carved out to be able to make improvements and be able to make targeted changes to address certain issues that can't wait 3 months. Let me give you an example that a lot of us can relate to. In a typical savings account, it is a known fact that you shouldn't spend your entire salary, and you should spend about 50% of needs, 30% on wants, and 20% on savings. Creating an emergency fund for expected situations comes from the savings. So in a way, savings plays a role in setting aside funds to make important purchases, being able to deal with unexpected situations, and growing funds through investment. Now, I'm not trying to sell you a savings account today, but basically, with the quality team, it's similar to this. We seize opportunities to work on improvements which can't wait a whole 3 months. We make ourselves able to react to the community and be able to deal with unforeseen challenges. And lastly, we invest into the game's pipeline and future. The quality team allows us to address technical debt, make tools, and improve pipelines to be able to invest into our future and to also catch ourselves from saying things like, oh, we don't have the time to deal with tech debt, we'll just clean up later. Here on Quality Team, we look at a wide range of changes. Quality of life, core technology, operations, everything that is in between the game content and being able to react to players on the live phase. By allocating dedicated and resources and broad expertise to gameplay improvements, core technology, and live operations, we can quickly react and address key community or project needs without impacting content teams. So the content teams can continue generating new content without being sidetracked or being distracted from their core objectives. This way, we can react very quickly to critical issues through short and medium-term gameplay improvements and support the game's technological evolution in the future. So again, there will always be unknowns in the live game, and it's not possible to predict every scenario and prepare for them. But what we can do is cater time, resources, and expertise to cater to live issues and player feedback. We'll always, as game developers, be excited to work on the next big and shiny thing, but having the flexibility and ability to react to issues without impacting release timelines is absolutely beneficial. Moving on to the second point, preparing processes. So you can cater for resources, and catering for resources is only one part of the equation. How do we deal with life issues when we encounter them? How do we prepare ourselves for the storm? This is where preparing processes comes in key. Game production before the game goes live looks a bit like this. And game production after a game goes live looks a little bit more like this. It gets busy. And it's sort of like, you're trying to cook and then you get a phone call and your kid is like trying to ask you to help with homework. There are things with conflicting priorities and different urgencies. So for the Skull and Bones team, we grew to excel at producing builds and patches so frequently that these things become second nature for us. For a live game, we'll need to react to different topics with different urgencies and priorities. Sometimes they can wait a month, and sometimes they can't because they are exploits or they're too game-breaking. So on Skull and Bones, we classify issues into 3 different categories, each with their own monitoring and resolution processes. I'll show you these categories and also the processes, but the details are less important. Critical issues include exploits, breakers, and blockers. Urgent issues include functionality, balance, and player feedback. Long-term issues are what we as developers want. It's our dreams to be able to get our game to a certain level that we are truly, truly proud of. And this never stops. So we categorize different topics into different buckets: critical, urgent, and long-term. Each of these employ a different handcrafted strategy and process to deal with these issues effectively, and also within a reasonable and feasible time frame. On life, it really looks like this. All of these processes, when put together, looks complex. It can be chaotic, but if we have set processes in place, it can be instead an organized chaos. So here's what the process at a high level looks like for critical issues. Here's what it looks like for urgent issues. It gets slightly more complex, more things are involved, but the key part here is the orange part, the team assessment and implementation, and also an internal fix, as well as the triage process that is in yellow. So these go through different triage sessions, these go through different individuals that are involved, as well as different timelines. And for long-term issues, we have more time to react to these, we have more time to do iteration, and we iterate more and polish until we are comfortable with the release. Now, with all of these processes, what is important to take home is that we have different processes in place for different situations. And so by having all of these processes in place even before we go live, it helps with the ability for us to react and just follow protocol. Now on weekends, I sail. So it's kind of interesting that I'm also on Skull and Bones, but you can't control the wind and current of the ocean, but you can develop a plan to navigate around them. And if you're skillful enough, you can even take advantage of the wind and current to reach your destination in a shorter amount of time. The key is to pick up the skills needed and also practice and go through them so that when the storm hits, reacting to such events will just be second nature. So to sum up the second point, define crafted processes so you can take a clinical approach to live issues, and then test them to reduce the load and stress on your team before. And last point, adapting always. So quality is not just outward facing, it's also inward facing into pipelines, tools, and processes. It's not just about how we can improve our game experience, but it's also how we can improve the dev experience. We look at ways to find efficiencies to solutions, we iterate on processes, and finally, we data-drive decisions so that we ensure that the decisions that we are making are reflected in the statistics that we review on a weekly basis. For me, as a project manager, there are a lot of things that I kind of do manually, and I also found a way to automate lots of these processes. So it's not just limited to the development team, but for management as well, there are ways in which we can find efficiencies in the things that we do. So the third point is we'll always need to adapt to the situation. The winds will change and the conditions will change, so just trim the sails accordingly. Detect changing sentiments and data-drive decisions. Now I want to quickly show you one example putting all of these together. In Season 1, when we launched the game, we saw that our player engagement for certain activities were kind of going up and down, but also in the long term it was slightly dropping. And so obviously, as the quality team, this is a project need that we needed to fill. Lower engagement means lower players interacting with your game, and that's not good for any game. So brainstorm different solutions, including being able to make events a bit clearer, being able to fast travel events so that players can engage in these activities quickly, and also a recommendation system you see here on the bottom left, which recommends relevant activities for players. Within days, we were able to come up with a very rough prototype, and this was the final product, where we were able to release it within 1 to 2 months of development. Subsequently, we also listed a list of events and implemented the fast travel ability for players, also within 2 months. 1 month after Season 2's release, we saw that post-implementation of fast travel, the engagement rate increased, which is a great sign. And if we take a more macro view, when we release fast travel, you can see that at that point, there was an increased engagement. And also when we released the event list, recommendation system, and activity visibility improvements, we also saw increased engagement. So we were very encouraged. And specifically for Season 3, we even saw that the engagement rate went up to further than what we've ever seen before. The community sentiment was also growing positively due to our quality of life changes. And it's very encouraging for the development team to be able to see positive feedback from the community. To sum up my presentation today, there are 3 key points in which we did in order to live in the moment. First is to reserve and carve out resources to be able to make these changes. Second is to prepare crafted processes for each of the different situations that we encounter so that we are well prepared and be able to reduce the load and stress on our developers. Finally, adapting to the situation at hand and being able to rapidly respond to changes. I hope that today's presentation has given you some insights and have probably inspired you to figure out what works for your team and be able to prepare for when your game goes live. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel, for that talk. We'll now go into the Q&A section. So, kicking off from Thomas, reserving resources is great when you're Ubisoft and resources aren't tight. You started your journey making an indie game. Would it have been possible there?
I think for an indie game, it's definitely possible as well. And I think that even at Ubisoft, when it comes to a AAA company and you have much more resources, it isn't necessarily not tight as well. What I mean by this is that, well, with more resources, you are expected to deliver a larger scope and better quality content. I think that whatever that I've shared earlier, especially preparing processes and also reserving capacity, can be scaled, whether it is for indie, for mobile, or for AAA as well. So I think it would have been possible. Thinking back on my experience in indie, definitely yes. We received feedback. So during indie, when we presented to, we brought a build to PAX and other game conventions as well. And when we go to these conventions, we also receive feedback. And reserving a subset of resources to address on these while the rest of the team develops the full game would have been quite ideal as well. So yes, I think it would have been possible then.
Okay, next question. Is it more expensive in the long run to maintain a live service game instead of releasing a single complete game at launch?
Is it more expensive in the long run to maintain a live game? I'm not sure if the expensive here refers to financially expensive or is it more intense in the long run, perhaps? But in the long run, to maintain a live service game, I think these are quite different models in which even in a live service game, we continue developing content on a regular basis. So it's kind of like taking the entire game development pipeline, squeezing it down into the 1 or 2 months, and repeating that over and over again. So I don't think it's necessarily more expensive or cheaper to maintain a live service game, but there are pros and cons to each one.
Yeah, I would also point out there's a difference between what a live service game is and the complete statement, which is that I think a box, we call in the industry a box product. So next question. Any example of issues that were wrongly assessed in terms of critical priority? How did you handle it?
So of course, it's less on wrongly assessed. I would say that there were issues that we initially felt were important or less important, and then the priorities changed over time. As we release new content and we release features and improvements, the community sentiment also shifts because players also join, new players join the player base as well. So the priorities of each of these players tends to change how our player segments are being organized as well. And what this means is that the priorities of certain issues and certain feedback do change over time. And it's on a regular basis whereby the teams assess whether or not it is more important or less important at that point in time and make recommendations so that we are able to re-triage and relook at their priorities.
What percentage of resources split between content and, is that QOL?
QOL. What is the percentage of resources split between content and QOL? In the event when budget is reduced, will reserve resources be cut first or will content be cut first? For us, I think for different projects, there's a different percentage split. So what works for us might not work for a team, for some other team. And definitely the more percentage that you put into QOL, the better the quality of the game that comes out, because we are doing polish and doing improvements. And I think what is important here is to ensure that you are able to still deliver the content that you promise to players and be able to balance the QOL at the same time. And because it is a certain percentage, if the budget is reduced, I think in general it would also scale accordingly. So it won't be lopsided one way.
So we still got a lot of great questions, but I'm going to throw you the last one. This is the easy one as well. What are some of the biggest challenges you foresee in maintaining player engagement and sustainability in Skull and Bones for the long term?
Some of the biggest challenges in maintaining long-term player engagement and sustainability. I think the biggest challenge, the single biggest challenge that we foresee is being able to create fresh and interesting content for players. And definitely there's a super long wish list that players want when it comes to a pirate fantasy. And when we look at all of these, it's, as developers, we want all of them. We really want all of them and we don't cut anything. But the biggest challenge here is to look at where are the opportunities for improved player engagement and where we can keep things fresh and interesting and not just rely on the same content types. So driving new experiences for players that fit within the pirate fantasy is probably the biggest challenge for us.
Great. Thanks so much, Samuel.
Thank you. Thanks, Ari.